have two of the most glorious cruise beasts out there, the Porsche Panamera Turbo and the BMW M760i. They are both two big-engined, super luxurious executive sedans that make you feel like a boss. So maybe if you have a supercar that you put away for the winter and you're in need of a beater that's not an SUV, these two sedans are really compelling choices. It might not seem like an apples to apples comparison, but as tested, these big sedans match up pretty closely in price, about $170,000. And despite them being totally different cars with totally different engines, it's not too crazy to think that people might cross-shop them. But after driving them back to back, we did realize that they're aimed at two very different buyers, which we'll get to later. The biggest edge that the BMW has over the Panamera is that everything about it is over the top. Like, it's cool, but it's just a bit too extra. The matte paint job is over the top, the engine is over the top, even the key is over the top. It's like a tiny smartphone with a touchscreen, and it's actually not that useful because everything you can do with this key, you can do with an app. The tech in this is also too much. Gesture controls, massaging and reclining seats, a little table in the back, soft closing doors, two screens, a removable tablet, and a footrest. These all look pretty cool and are pretty useful for people riding in the back, and they're impressive to people who are lucky enough to ride with you, but they're really gimmicky and aren't that useful for real people. Also, these screens back here aren't touchscreens, so you have to use this little tablet to control the seat-mounted screens, which I guess makes sense if you're too reclined and can't reach it, but come on! But it is super cool that this is basically a business class cabin, and if you're being driven, it's a super classy and comfortable way to get around. I am really enjoying this car. It's just big and brash, and it has such a cool attitude that just makes you feel like a boss when you drive it. And if someone sees this just rolling down the road, they're gonna know it's someone important inside, like maybe a dictator or a gang boss or something. And the great thing about this is the V12, so it has so much extra power on tap that it'll be able to handle all the extra weight of the bulletproofing that you'll inevitably have to use if you are a dictator. I just adore the way this BMW accelerates. This V12 is just so smooth, and it just pulls and pulls, and it feels like it'll never run out of steam. It is probably one of the smoothest engines I've ever experienced, and it's the same one they use in Rolls-Royces, so that's a testament to how good it is. The massive 6.6-liter twin-turbo V12 is one of the biggest engines you can buy right now, and it outputs 600 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque. And that's available from just 1900 RPM. The power gets to all four wheels via an 8-speed automatic transmission, and it naturally has a rear-wheel bias, but when it's wearing winter tires like it is now, this thing is just an animal in the snow. And even if you're not being chauffeured, the BMW is still really good to drive. I drive it in sport mode most of the time just because the steering's a little bit too light otherwise. But what surprised me was that it feels like a much smaller car to drive, and that has a lot to do with the rear wheel steering, which makes the car feel a lot more nimble, and it reduces the turning radius and also gives it more stability at higher speeds. And I remember when driving a car like this through a parking garage would be so nerve-wracking and really intimidating, but with that rear wheel steering, the car is just so easy to maneuver around obstacles, and that's really something that I can appreciate. The one good thing about this car being so big and heavy is that it just glides over rough surfaces, and it's just really good at ironing out bad roads. The active suspension control system combines the damper control system and the air suspension to keep roll to a minimum while still keeping things cushy too. The big sedan doesn't love corners, but let's be real, this isn't a car you really want to take on the track. It's also pretty easy to park and maneuver, despite how big it is. The rear steering really helps it feel smaller, and it has a really useful 360-degree top view backup camera that shows you if you're at risk of dinging the car next to you. The infotainment system is also pretty good, and the head-up display is crisp and very useful. The main screen has a few different input options. You can use the touchscreen or the rotary knob, which also recognizes handwriting, so you don't have to scroll through letters while you're driving. When it comes down to infotainment, the Panamera is down by 3 screens, but the one the driver uses is probably the most important, and it's superior to BMW's setup for a few reasons. The menu structure is much more intuitive, the options are clear, and in general, it just seems better thought out and more user-friendly. And the interior also looks much more modern in the Porsche. I like that they've got rid of that wall of buttons and they're instead using this slick buttonless setup as well. It works because everything is well labeled and it gives you haptic feedback when you push the buttons. They simplified the interior and made it prettier and more user-friendly in the process. I know the Panamera is down 4 cylinders and it doesn't have all those fancy gizmos that the BMW does, but something it does do better is drive. And it's a Porsche, so it's not like that should surprise you. It just feels a lot more like a sports car through the corners. The steering has a nice weight and a great crispness and responsiveness to it the BMW just doesn't have. Although the BMW has 12 cylinders, it is not a sports car, where this Panamera Turbo definitely is. I also really prefer how the Panamera looks over the BMW. The 7 Series is bold and brash, and it has a classic sedan look, which I really love, but the Panamera just has a certain refinement and classiness that I really like, and I also really like the practicality of having the sport back instead of a traditional trunk. The Panamera Turbo is powered by a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 that outputs 550 horsepower and 567 pound-feet of torque, which is obviously quite a bit less than the BMW. Power gets to all 4 wheels via Porsche's excellent 8-speed PDK. This Sportback is way faster than you'd ever need it to be. It gets to 60 miles an hour in 3.6 seconds, and the BMW actually does it in 3.7, but with the Sport Chrono package, which our car has, the Porsche does it in 3.4 seconds. The BMW just gives me the giggles in a straight line, but the Panamera is much more fun in the corners. Like the BMW, the Panamera Turbo has rear wheel steering that makes it feel more nimble and gives it a smaller turning radius, and a standard 3-chamber air suspension that allows for sports car handling without sacrificing comfort. I just adore the way this Porsche handles. These two cars end up being for two very different people. The Panamera is much better for drivers, while the BMW is better for people who prefer to cruise, or maybe people who value luxury over handling. And if you do want to be chauffeured, the BMW wins this comparison hands down. It has the prestige, the status, and the wow factor that really impressed us. And although I'm having trouble saying no to anything with 12 cylinders, the Panamera ends up being my personal pick because I'm a driver, even though the BMW is the better executive sedan.